Hey everyone, how's it going? Today we're going to start out by talking about the concept of resource management. How fun does that sound? During wartime, certain resources are considered to be vital to the war effort and thus have to be conserved when able and produced or collected as much as possible. In my mind, the most important resource, and probably the one that had the most impact in terms of how World War II played out, is oil. Oil is needed for gasoline and diesel that keeps your trucks, tanks, and planes going. It can also be important for use as lubricant to help keep your equipment functioning properly. Of course, another vital resource is metal, all kinds of metal: steel, iron, aluminum, titanium, cobalt, etc. Then there's cloth for clothing, foodstuffs for soldier rations, rubber for tires and gaskets, and the like. To put it mildly, there's a lot of stuff that you have to conserve during wartime, and it behooves a country to conserve wherever they can and however they can. The subject of today's video is an example of the US government trying to conserve vital resources in the production of their airplanes. It's a plane designed with resource conservation in mind, made by and large out of abundant and easy-to-obtain materials. This is the Bell XP-77. In October 1941, just 2 months before the United States would enter the war, the U.S. government went to the Bell Aircraft Corporation with a request. Seeing direct conflict on the horizon and aware of the potential resource constrictions the war would cause, the government wanted Bell to make a compact, lightweight, cheap, easy-to-produce, resource-efficient fighter. Specifically, they asked Bell to design the plane with non-strategic materials. To Bell, the solution was clear. Instead of using steel, aluminum, and other vital metals, they would design a modern-day fighter made almost entirely out of wood. Not only would the use of wood keep the plane lightweight, it was made with an incredibly abundant resource that the US ideally had plenty of. Additionally, in Bell's design, the strength of Japanese and German aircraft was taken into account, and the XP-77 would ideally be able to contend with the speed and agility of the Japanese Zero and the German Bf-109. Internally at Bell, the lightweight, agility, and speed of the design led to it being known as the Tri-4, a reference to the goal of a 400 horsepower, 400 mile an hour, 4,000-pound plane. On May 16, 1942, the U.S. Air Force, after reviewing the design, called for an initial 25 to be built for testing. The finished product would ideally be this: measuring in at 22 feet 10 inches long, 27 feet 6 inches wide, and 8 feet 2 inches tall, the XP-77 was rather small, especially when compared to the planes it would hypothetically be fighting, the Bf-109 and the Zero. Owing to its mostly wood construction, the XP-77 would be pretty light, with an empty weight of just 2,855 pounds and a max takeoff weight of just above 4,000 pounds. Compare this to the Bf-109 and the Zero, with max weights of just over 6,000 pounds and 7,500 pounds respectively. The XP-77 was practically dwarfed by them. Needing to keep the weight down as much as possible, the XP-77 would be rather lightly armed as far as US fighters from this era are concerned, with a single 20mm cannon in the nose and two 50 caliber machine guns in the wings. A later request from the US government led to an optional 300-pound bomb or depth charge being added if needed. The body of the plane, as mentioned, would be made almost entirely of wood. In the name of being resource efficient, the body would be held together with glue, resin, and nails. It would basically be unarmored, as the skin would be made of plywood. As the fuselage was rather slim, done to save space and reduce weight, the cockpit had to be placed pretty far back to have enough room up front for the engine compartment. The rest of its design was pretty standard looking, all things considered. Powering the XP-77 would ideally be the then-in-development Ranger V770-9 12-cylinder supercharged engine with 520 horsepower. As the aircraft was light and the 12-cylinder supercharged engine would give it much more torque, power, and acceleration, Bell hoped that it would allow the XP-77 to top 400 miles an hour in top speed, which would be quite the achievement. However, these hopes would soon be dashed, as Ranger could not supply the supercharged V770-9 engines, so the XP-77 would be given unsupercharged V770-7 engines. Under an altitude of around 12,000 feet, this would ideally not cause much of an issue, but above that, engine performance would decrease substantially, limiting how effective the XP-77 could be as a result. However, this decrease in performance from the different engine would not be the XP-77's biggest issue initially. The fact that the original engine was being delayed meant that the original order of 25 planes for testing would be revised on October 10, 1942, to just 6, scheduled for delivery in April 1943. However, this delayed date would be pushed back even further due to a combination of weight concerns and other production taking priority at Bell. As it turned out, after some further examination of the design, it was found that the XP-77 would sit just above 3,700 pounds, which was close, if not just above, the weight limit the US government asked Bell to keep the plane under. It was still under Bell's previously stated 4,000-pound weight limit, but they had to follow government requests here. To reduce that weight, the proposed 20mm cannon in the nose was removed from the design. The other issue, with other projects taking priority, Bell was already producing a great deal of the P-39 fighters, and by 1943, the year the revised delivery was to be complete, Bell was also producing their new P-63 fighter, their experimental P-59 jet fighter, and they were contracted to produce B-24 and B-29 bombers. Simply put, Bell had a lot on their plate at the time, and this meant that the production of the XP-77 had to be contracted out, and problems with these contracts led to further delays. Additionally, by mid-1943, the general picture of World War II had changed, and Allied forces were making decent progress in both theaters, so the need for a resource-efficient fighter of the XP-77's nature had basically vanished. America wasn't particularly lacking in resources that would warrant the use of an all-wooden fighter, so by this point the XP-77 was kinda pointless. Still, the project would be permitted to continue, albeit on a further diminished basis, as the order was further reduced to just 2 planes. Finally, on April 1st, 1944, the XP-77 would fly for the first time at Wright Field in Ohio. The results were underwhelming. To start, with the less powerful engine, the XP-77 could only reach a top speed of 330 miles an hour. Plus, with this test flight not including the weaponry or their added weight, a combat-ready version would have been even slower. This speed would have been okay in 1941. In 1944, though, for a fighter, such a low top speed was pretty much a non-starter. Additionally, the pilot would note that the XP-77 suffered from significant vibration issues. This was caused by the engine being bolted directly to the wooden airframe without any method of dampening or isolating the vibrations the engine caused. This was done, of course, to help reduce the weight. The test pilot also noted that the plane controlled poorly, the cockpit was cramped, and that forward visibility was reduced on account of how far back the cockpit had to be located. Then, on October 2nd or 22nd, 1944, sources differ, one of the only 2 XP-77s would be lost when it entered into an uncontrollable spin, which forced the pilot to eject. The other XP-77 would live on for a few more years as a showpiece and as a gate guard somewhere, before deteriorating to the point that it was eventually destroyed. In the end, the XP-77 failed because of two key reasons. The first and most damaging was engine delays and cancellations. The original engine that may have gotten it up to speeds of 400 miles an hour was heavily delayed and eventually abandoned, meaning that a different one had to be used on the fly. How much better the original engine would have been is unknown since it was never installed, but the severe engine delays led directly into the second issue of the XP-77 being worthless by the time 1943 and 44 rolled around. America was no longer in a position that it needed a resource-efficient fighter, and even then, the performance of the XP-77 was so far beneath what the US already had in its arsenal. There was no real use for something like the XP-77, no real role it could have at this stage of the war, so it was a pointless endeavor. It only really continued due to the curiosity of Bell and the US Air Force of how an all-wood fighter like the XP-77 would perform. In a different situation, and in a different country that would have had issues securing vital resources, the XP-77 may have actually been a pretty valuable plane. I mean, something is better than nothing, after all. But in the United States, this little fighter made of plywood, nails, and glue just wasn't needed, and got left behind as a result. Alright, and with that, we're going to go ahead and end for today. So, thank you all for watching the video. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. To be honest, I'm kinda sad the last XP-77 was destroyed all those years ago. I think it would be a pretty interesting museum piece. I think it would stand out at least, being so much smaller than all the other planes there. But anyway, I hope you liked the video, I hope you watch my next one, and I hope you learned something from this one. So, see ya.